read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Good morning and welcome to Sunday with Michael Portillo. According to T.S. Eliot, April is the cruelest month. But not, I hope, for you loyal viewers, as we view the wasteland of British politics, consider the damage to world order delivered by Iran's attack on Israel, but also graze on the fertile pastures of arts, culture and world affairs. Today, my political panel will give its reaction to the new violence in the Middle East and will consider the problems, including that of our national security, that will confront a new Labour government. How will it resolve also the conflict between Wes Streeting's reforming zeal and Keir Starmer's ultra-caution? How will Labour deal with the United States that might be led by Donald Trump? A trio of ex-mandarins calls for the Foreign Office to be renamed, its colonial-era paintings to be removed because it is too rooted in the past. Their paper claims that the full title of the department is too anchored in the past. Is this another attack on British history? What should our diplomats be doing for us? Baroness Claire Fox will join me to discuss. We'll also talk about the rabbit tax, dubbed from the French poser un lapin, which means to be a no-show. The French Prime Minister, Gabriel Attal, has announced a new penalty of €5 on French patients who miss their doctor's appointments without giving 24 hours notice. Should the National Health Service adopt this too? I'm joined punctually by consultant surgeon J. Merion Thomas. Stefan Kyriazis will be here to talk about his latest theatrical adventures. He's been to see the 84-year-old Sir Ian McKellen as Falstaff. And he'll also reflect on the early closure of Sheridan Smith's West End musical and the implications for experimental theatre. Before all of that, though, your headlines with Sam Francis.
Michael, thank you very much, and a very good morning to you. It's just coming up to 3 minutes past 11, and we start with some breaking news in the last hour that Rishi Sunak is set to join a meeting of G7 leaders for urgent talks amid rising tensions in the Middle East after Iran attacked Israel last night. Israel has now warned the confrontation is not over yet, while Iran is threatening to launch a much larger attack if Israel retaliates. Iran's state media has also carried a warning for the US, saying its bases would be targeted if Washington backs Israel's military response. RAF jets were used to shoot down Iranian drones last night, most of which were intercepted without causing any significant damage. A small number, though, did reach Israel, critically injuring a 7-year-old girl and causing some damage to an army base. Health Secretary Victoria Adkins told GB News this morning that Britain will stand with the people of Israel.
We will be working across our free democracies across the world to ensure that we stand with Israel, but we do so to try and de-escalate the tensions in the region, because nobody wants to see an escalation in the sorts of military activities that we have seen.
In other news, Angela Rayner is facing mounting pressure over her two homes row after a former aide told police that she had not told the truth about her real home. Her former chief advisor has given a statement to Greater Manchester Police contradicting her claims. Matt Finnegan said there was no doubt in his mind that the Labour MP's actual home in 2014 was with her then husband and not a former council house where she was registered to live. Police this week launched an investigation looking into possible breaches of electoral law. The Deputy Labour leader has promised, though, to step down if it's determined she did commit a criminal offence, but said she has followed all the rules at all times. And Sir Keir Starmer says he has full confidence in her. The Conservative MP Tim Loughton has announced he'll stand down at the next election, joining a growing list of departing Tory MPs. He's represented East Worthing and Shoreham since 1997, but says it's wiser to leave 5 minutes too soon than continue for 5 years too long. His decision adds to the 64 Conservative MPs who are not seeking re-election. The veteran backbencher becomes the 100th MP overall to stand down. To Sydney now, and the family of a man who killed 6 people in a stabbing attack at a shopping centre has described his actions as truly horrific. 40-year-old Joel Cauchi was identified as the assailant who carried out that killing spree near Bondi Beach yesterday. 5 people, including 4 women and a man, died at the scene, and another woman, the mother of a 9-month-old baby, later died in hospital. Her child, who was also attacked, is understood to now be recovering well. The family of the attacker say he had been suffering from mental health issues since he was a teenager, and they released a statement in support of the police officer who killed him, saying she was only doing her job. The Premier of the state of New South Wales, Chris Minns, has paid tribute to emergency crews and members of the public.
Many people would be showing real anger at so many people having been killed and real loss of life. And the individual stories of those that have been killed that have been reported in the media are heartbreaking. I kind of want to search for a silver lining, but it has been incredible to see complete strangers jump in, run towards the danger, put their own lives in harm's way to save someone that they've never met before. And look, there's not too many positives to take out of a horrifying event, but we've got some wonderful people in our city.
And before we hand back to Michael, some royal news. The Duke of Kent is stepping down as Colonel of the Scots Guards after 50 years. In the last few minutes, the Duke arrived at the regiment's Black Sunday parade in Westminster. He's meeting members of the Guards there, ending his time overseeing the prestigious regiment. Edward, who was a cousin of Queen Elizabeth II, will now hand the role over to the Duke of Edinburgh. And the 88-year-old says that holding the position has been a true honour. That's the latest from the newsroom. More in the next half hour. Until then, do sign up to GB News Alerts. Just scan the code there on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much, Sam Francis. Wes Streeting, Labour's Shadow Health Secretary, last week expanded on his opinion that the National Health Service needs radical reform. He attacked those middle-class lefties who criticise his plan to use spare capacity in the private sector to help the National Health Service patients awaiting treatment. Will there be a struggle within the Labour government between his radicalism and Sir Keir Starmer's ultra-caution? Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, once accused Donald Trump of being a racist KKK and Nazi sympathiser. Whatever evidence there might have been for that, it's looking quite likely that the Donald will be the next president of the United States. How would Labour form a relationship with the United States if Donald Trump were to re-enter the White House? Might a Labour government be blown off course by the issue of national security if Ukraine is defeated and as Israel today faces enemies on all sides? To consider those questions, I have with me political commentator Matthew Stadlen, former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire, and public affairs consultants and former Labour aide Stella Santikidou. I thought I was going to do better than that, Stella. I'm sorry about that.
Very well.
Scarlett, let's consider this question of whether a Labour government may in fact be blown off course by the international security situation, by which I mean having to devote much more time and much more money to defence than presently seems likely.
It was Harold Macmillan who said, it's events, dear boy, events. And that is always the problem of going into government, is there are things you can plan for and there are things that just happen. You're absolutely right. I mean, we have to worry about Ukraine. We have to really worry about what's going on in the Middle East and how that's all going to be pulled into. And of course, what's interesting is that only on Friday, Keir Starmer said that he wanted to up defence spending to 2.5% of GDP, and he was absolutely committed to a nuclear thing. So actually, I mean, they've already started understanding that defence and national security is going to be very heavy. And as far as Trump's concerned, it's quite interesting, actually, that, I mean, I was talking to the Lamy team about Trump saying, my view is that it would make it very difficult. And they said, we've been talking to Republicans for months and months and months. We can work with a Republican government. We can work with Trump.
Stella, we've just been reminded there by Scarlett that Sir Keir Starmer has just said that it is his intention to raise defence spending to 2.5% of GDP when circumstances allow. I wonder whether that remark, which has just been made, doesn't now seem rather out of date, given what's happened overnight. I mean, there may be compelling circumstances where a Labour government would have to do much more than increase defence spending to 2.5% when circumstances allow.
I think that foreign affairs is going to be a big opportunity for the Labour Party because it will give the Keir Starmer government a chance to differentiate themselves and to really shine when you're looking at the local situation, a national situation where the economy is really, really hard, and we've already know that they have established there will not be a good situation for the first few months where Keir Starmer is in government, but internationally there is a big opportunity to make a difference and to show some gravitas, to show some leadership, to differentiate themselves from the United States slightly. I hope they will do that, especially if Donald Trump is the next president. I don't think that it's going to be a problem if Donald Trump is the premier. I think what politicians very often misunderstand about a politician like Donald Trump is that he will respond to strength. He doesn't want people to flatter him. And the comments that Labour politicians have made before Donald Trump became president, where David Cameron did the same thing in the past. What are you going to do about it? Donald Trump used to be a celebrity. Obviously, all sorts of people have said all sorts of things about him. There is no going around that. And in any case, his personal situation, to me, is one where I don't think that he has the luxury, really, not to work with the next British Prime Minister.
Matthew, one of the effects of what's happened in the last few days is that the focus has switched from Gaza to Iran. And consequently, this has driven the United States and Israel back together. They were beginning to fall apart. I wonder whether that poses interesting problems for the Labour Party, because at the moment, everybody in the West is having to say we're full square with Israel, because at the moment Israel is fighting Iran.
I think everyone waking up this morning will be thinking about what's just happened. This is a major escalation. There are no bones about it. I suspect Iran doesn't want to take this any further because they know that they are weaker than the United States and Israel and other allies combined. But this was an audacious attack, unprecedented attack from Iranian soil on the Israeli mainland. So this is a big moment. There's no doubt that with an incoming Labour government, Keir Starmer, John Healey, at the moment the Shadow Defence Secretary, and of course David Lammy, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, are going to have their work cut out. If you look at, and I know we're going to come on to this, if you look at Labour's main underpinning of its manifesto coming up, there are 5 main missions. But those themselves are underpinned by a stable economy, aspiring to a stable economy, strong defence and secure borders. Those words, strong defence, really matter. I think we can take this incoming Labour government, if that's what it turns out to be, very seriously on this. Starmer is a grown-up politician and he understands the importance of that. In direct response to what you've just said, there have been those who've said we should stop arming Israel. And I'm someone who shares enormous concerns by the way that Israel has prosecuted its war in Gaza. But if we were to completely, or if America, more importantly, and Germany, if the international community was simply to abandon Israel because of the horrors of what we're witnessing in Gaza, then ultimately it would become relatively defenceless against Iran. And I don't think most sane people want that, either for the sake of Israel or for the wider international community.
Yes, you say that. I mean, it strikes me that people did not see that in fighting Hamas, Israel was fighting a proxy of Iran. Now that Israel is fighting Iran, maybe things are a tiny bit clearer. Scarlett Maguire, Stella there was saying, oh, well, you know, Lammy will have to eat his words, and lots of people have done it in the past. I put it to you, is it possible for David Lammy to be the Foreign Secretary if Donald Trump is going to be the president?
Well, he certainly thinks it's possible. I think.
You're here to give your opinion.
I think Stella's right. I mean, look, David Cameron could not have been ruder about Donald Trump, and yet he went to Florida, saw him, probably failed, frankly, to persuade him that he should tell the Republicans to arm Ukraine.
I mean, he is a fag-end foreign secretary, probably. I mean, we're all anticipating there's going to be a Labour government. He's a sort of fag-end foreign secretary, and it's not very clear that he achieved anything. So, to say that David Lammy will be no worse than David Cameron, as far as Trump is concerned, is not particularly consoling.
Well, I mean, frankly, when Trump first got in and Theresa May was Prime Minister, I mean, we achieved practically nothing in real terms. We did get Trump over because we gave him the Queen, right? I mean, that was quite a lot. I'm quite sure that Keir and David could give him the King this time. I mean, I just think a lot of people have said a lot of things, but I do know that they have been working hard to understand that we might have Trump as president, and if we do have Trump as president, we do have to do things with the states.
Let's change subject. Stella, I see, Wes Streeting saying some really interesting things about National Health Service reform, but my view of Sir Keir Starmer is that he is, well, very super cautious. Now, it's one thing when these things have to be worked out in opposition because nobody wants to present too much of a target. But when they get into government, is this going to be a real conflict between the radicals who want to make changes to our public services and Keir Starmer may be standing in their way? What do you think?
I think hardly radical. I think that what Wes Streeting is suggesting is something that more or less, in one way or another, has already been happening. A lot of people have been talking about it, and he's talking about something very limited. We want to tackle the waiting lists because so many problems come down street from the NHS waiting list, not least the fact that we have so many people who are entrenched into long-term sickness and who cannot work, and therefore they can't pay taxes. But I don't think that Keir Starmer is worried about Wes Streeting. I think Keir Starmer is very pleased with Wes Streeting and with any Labour Party politicians who is willing to go out there and make and ruffle some feathers, especially what I find very interesting about the last week is the comment that Wes Streeting made about middle-class lefties, which a lot of people took issues with. A lot of people were a bit offended. They were like, why are you using this culture war language? Why are you not being a serious politician? And why would you mention something that's basically an issue on Twitter, but not so much perhaps in real life? But what it showed to me is that Wes Streeting is not afraid of being combative, and he's very good at being combative. He's a very good media performer. He's a very good commentator and analyst. And I think that this is going to be an asset when Labour is in government and they're going to have to basically fight that kind of fight.
Yes, Matt Stadler, my point was not so much that Starmer is not presently irritated with Wes Streeting. It's rather that Wes Streeting, when they're in government, may be irritated with Starmer because he may think that there are things to do and Starmer may be, because of his caution, standing in his way. And although I take Stella's point that, of course, it's been discussed before that we should use spare capacity, I feel that Streeting has done more than that. He's adopted a completely different tone to the National Health Service. He said this is not a sacred cow. This is not something which is performing well. This is not something where we can sit back. I mean, that is a completely different way of looking at the National Health Service from the Labour tradition.
It's something that a Labour politician can afford to say, much more difficult for a Conservative to say that. I think there'll be a great collective sigh of relief around the country because, of course, we back the NHS, but we can all see that in many ways it's failing. Now, who's responsible for its failure? Is it COVID? Is it the Tory government? Yes, they say there's record investment, but does that mean it's sufficient investment? Is it mismanagement? All these things should be on the table.
Is it the system?
Some people would argue it's the system. I don't think a Labour government is going to stop free healthcare at the point of delivery. What Wes Streeting is trying to do, as well as, I hope, putting more money into it, is he's going to say, well, it's OK if there's a bit of private provision, if there's a bit of private supply. That is not a key principle, I think, in the minds of most British people. What they are concerned about is this principle of free at the point of delivery. And by the way, on the chemistry of it, we simply don't know what that's going to be like in reality. We know that we lived through that. We used to work together this week on the BBC years ago when there were the TBGBs, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, constant friction. That can be harmful. On the other hand, you can have a bit of yin and yang, and the cautionary Starmer with the sort of more radical streeting could be quite an interesting combination. By the way, I was on stage with Theresa May, one of your former colleagues, just this week. I was interviewing her. I was rather impressed by her sense of public duty, even though I've been critical of her in the past. And she made it very clear, in a rather diplomatic way, that working with President Trump wasn't a particularly easy thing to do. It didn't mean that she wasn't up to the task, and I suspect the same will be the case with Keir Starmer.
Scarlett Maguire, we only have a few moments. Just tell me, do you think that a future Labour government might have an attack of the TBGBs? In other words, a different...
No, I think the thing about Wes Streeting is he goes for headlines. And we know the best headlines are if you attack your own. So to talk about middle-class lefties immediately gave him the headline. That's what... I mean, if you look at what Wes is really saying, Wes is saying, let's get the health service. He's not that radical, actually.
A marvellous discussion. I thank you all. Very, very interesting points indeed. Matthew Stadler, Scarlett Maguire and Stella Santikidu. After the break, I'll be discussing the proposals that the Foreign Office should be renamed as it is too elitist and too anchored in the past. I'll be speaking to Baroness Claire Fox. You're watching Michael Portillo on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family. Simply go to gbnews.com/yoursay.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Cheryl Baker, good morning, Cheryl.
Good morning.
When you think back to 1981, I mean, obviously the ABBA victory then wasn't all that long ago, 9 years earlier. Do you think they had a huge influence then on the sort of direction that Eurovision was taking?
Yeah, they did. They changed it completely. Because up to then, it had all been very staid and a bit posh, long frock, sticky bow ties, you know. And then they came along and they blew it out of the water. They looked so different. And they modernised it. And I think, yeah, it made a big change. Made a big change after that.
And we were watching your performance on Eurovision a little bit earlier on of making your mind up. I mean, you had so much fun, didn't you, up on that stage? Were you, in some part, inspired by ABBA?
Yes, I would say so. It was, ABBA was 74. I turned professional in 75 and did my first song for Europe, which was, you know, when they choose the British song to go forward. I did my first one in February 1976. So, yeah, it was only months after ABBA's performance that I started my own Eurovision journey. Yeah, they just changed the face of it. They changed the face of Eurovision. And if you look at what Eurovision is now, I think that all started with ABBA's performance. It made people think this is much more than just a song contest. It's all about the look. I mean, the clothes, they looked fantastic. And even the composer, or not the composer, what's he called? The conductor. He was dressed as Napoleon. It made it fun. Fantastic song, obviously, brilliant singing, but the whole look of it just changed the way that Eurovision is, and to this day.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. A trio of former civil servants and diplomats this week published a plan that proposes that the Foreign Office should be replaced by a less elitist Department for International Affairs. Its present full title, the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, is supposedly anchored in the past. It should also modernise its working environment. The paper calls for the department to display fewer colonial-era pictures on the walls and insists that we cannot simply brush aside concerns around the UK's historical legacy. Given how much Britain's role has changed since its building, which was designed by George Gilbert Scott, opened in 1868, do the reformers have a point? Joining me to discuss this is the founder of the Academy of Ideas and the former MEP, Baroness Claire Fox. Claire, great to see you. That point that I raised at the end there, they are in this very ancient building with rooms that have names like the Durbar Court, obviously referring back to the period when the monarch was the emperor or empress of India. Is there a point that this building is a bit absurd for what the Foreign Office does today?
Well, in the sense that the report feels as though it's been written by a group of interior decorators and seems to have avoided what would seem to me to be hugely important at the moment. We are going through what can only be described as a challenging time in terms of international relations. It would be fantastic if former Mandarins would put their minds to thinking about foreign policy. But instead, we have a kind of rather shallow and superficial demand, really, that there's a rupture from the past. And I think as far as the building goes, the building is beautiful. It certainly reflects the past. But one of the things that's important, surely, about the geopolitical priorities of any country is that you have a sense of the past to understand where you're going in the future and can decide what to do in the present. This idea of kind of the past is our problem, which has become very fashionable, is the least of our problems. And in fact, I think it's important to have a certain context in which you work. There's nothing wrong with that. And one of the main key issues around foreign policy has always been putting national interests first. And guess what? This report doesn't want us to do that at all.
No. What is the impact on the people who work in the building and who visit the building? So, first of all, the Foreign Secretary has an office the size of a tennis court. And then, of course, you know, our diplomats are sitting around in offices with enormous paintings of monarchs and imperial grandeur. And then visitors come to see them. Now, on the one hand, you could say the visitors love to see such a glorious building and are impressed. Or you could say, you know, they're coming from somewhere like the United States and they think this is absolutely absurd, given our present weight in foreign affairs.
I genuinely think that from the point of view of visitors, they're generally, oh, isn't this a wonderful historical building? They do not find it. I mean, I appreciate that we are almost, this report would encourage anyone who visits from an overseas country to be offended on our behalf. But this is written by British Mandarins who have decided that it's inappropriate. I also think the idea that people who work in the building will have the wrong sense of themselves. I mean, I wish there was a little bit more self-confidence in what the UK might represent. It's now got its sovereign powers back post-Brexit. It's meant to be considering what the role of the UK is. And this report actually calls for humility, for less consideration of Britain as being a powerful nation. In fact, it doesn't want Britain to consider itself and its own role in terms of national sovereignty at all. It says that we should have more international role with NGOs, go for group work. I mean, I can't begin to tell you how disastrous I consider this to be at a time in which I would want the Foreign Office to be taking itself seriously. And all I'm saying is that when I'm in the House of Lords, and there is nothing about the furnishings of the House of Lords that are modest or humble. And you could say that I walk around thinking, oh, I must be a baroness because I'm here in this historic. Actually, it gives me a sense of the tradition of the country that I'm in, of what Parliament really stands for, how it got there, and my rather modest role in it.
Let me ask you what you think diplomats are for, and let me give you an answer as someone who used to be a minister. I mean, to me, what diplomats were for was, when I went to a country or when I was dealing with the country, to give me a real insight on that country. Because I couldn't possibly understand the inner workings of Serbia, which I was dealing with at the time, without people on the ground who understood a little bit about the culture, understood how Serbs saw the world in this example. What do you think diplomats are for?
Well, I think that's... You describe very well, as I understand it. I assume as well that you're there to represent the country that you... there's also an element of which you represent the country that you are the diplomat for. One of my concerns, I suppose, at the moment is that this report on the Foreign Office, which I think, if I was a foreign diplomat, I might note, is that the United Kingdom has lost confidence in itself, that it's going through a period of de-civilisation. It's kind of embarrassed by its past, and it's part of a general trend to despise and show contempt for everything that Britain is represented. So if I was a diplomat from another country, I might read this report and say, they're absolutely doomed. They hate themselves. They're full of self-loathing. They want to hide everything. They can't see anything positive about their past at all, and they want a very diminished role in the world. So in that sense, you don't have to be a spy or a diplomat. You just need to read the report. On the other hand, I think that makes it a fait accompli. And I know that it's become fashionable to have this fracture between historical, the history of our country, a shared history, by the way, because that's one of the things that gives a nation a sense of cohesion. Even if it's a shared history, parts of which you think are terrible, you understand it. This is almost like saying, wipe the plate clean. We don't like it.
Thank you very much. So it seems that people in other countries reading this report might think that we're doomed, but if they tuned into GB News and heard Claire Fox, they would think something very different. Coming up are the French leading the way with their plans to discipline patients who fail to attend appointments. Is a €5 fine for non-attendance the answer? You're watching Michael Portillo on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Offline and overlooked. That's what Age UK say millions of British pensioners are. Why? Because they cannot or won't access the internet. It's leading to digital exclusion. So the charity's campaigning for public services like banks, utilities and even the NHS to maintain a more human approach.
Everything's online. People assume you've got a smartphone with a mobile number and an email, and without that you don't exist in this world anymore. We've got to try and get the government to see that it's so important to make people feel that they belong, because there's a feeling that the older generation just feel that they're forgotten, they're in the way, and we already know that anyway, but it's just another reason for them to feel that they're not wanted. They'll just accept it and they'll say, well, that's it, I can't do it anymore, and that's it, whereas other people would be really kicking and screaming. So we need to be the voice for older people.
Despite digital technology playing an increasing role in our lives, around 1 in 5 over 65s in the UK don't use the internet. Thornycroft Centre in Pontefract, West Yorkshire, provides a space for this age group to socialise and get help to go online.
I'm not that good with mobiles, so when you mention anything about online, I ain't a clue what you're talking about.
The closure of thousands of banks is also detrimental to the older generation.
A lot of our members what come, they tend to use cash. They don't like to use bank cards. I think a lot of it's trust or the lack of knowledge. They don't understand how it works. I think they're very vulnerable as well with online. It's really important that they're aware how to use it and how to use it safely.
So, in an online era, it's still crucial for many to have an offline option.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Overnight, the sky above Jerusalem has been lit up by explosions as Israel intercepts projectiles launched by Iran. Joining us from that city is the British Colonel Richard Kemp. Richard, thank you for joining us on GB News. Could I put this point to you? With about 99% of the projectiles shot down, has this not, in effect, been a demonstration not of Iranian strength, but of impotence?
That's exactly what it is. I think it shows both the weakness of Iran, despite their much kind of signalled plans to give severe punishment to Israel. It shows their weakness, their inability to do that by this means anyway, and it also shows the comparable strength of Israel, particularly when it's supported as it was last night by its allies from the UK, the US, France, and also some Arab countries who flew combat planes to intercept some of the missiles. So yes, it is a demonstration of Iran's weakness, but we shouldn't at the same time consider that that doesn't mean Iran doesn't present a threat. Let's not forget that Iran is on the cusp of building a nuclear bomb and gaining nuclear capability, which, if it was to use that either on the end of a missile that did go through, or indeed in some other delivery form, then that would be potentially devastating for whatever target it was delivered at. Plus, of course, they've got proxies all around the region, including ringing Israel with the explicit intention of attacking Israel from every direction. And then they have sleeper cells, I suppose you could call it, in countries around Europe and around the world to carry out terrorist attacks against us if necessary. Not probably the greatest power they've got outside of Iran itself is 150,000 missiles deployed in Lebanon pointing at Israel. Some have been fired, but most are there as a deterrent against an Israeli attack against Iran, or indeed a US attack against Iran. So this means has not worked for Iran, and it's deeply embarrassing for them, I'm sure.
Richard.
But they have other strings to their bow.
Richard, a second point, if I may, and quite briefly, if you would. But Iran seems to have achieved something which seemed politically impossible, which is to unify President Biden and Mr. Netanyahu, who had been at loggerheads. But now, of course, the United States is bound to say that it is full square with Israel.
Well, I think President Biden's strategic priority is to win the US general election. That's what he's interested in. That's why he's been trying to persuade Israel to ratchet down its campaign in Gaza. He's been piling the pressure on Israel to do that, because he thinks that the longer that goes on, the more violent it gets, the more damaging it's going to be in his electoral campaign. And that's why he also gave warnings to Iran and said he would be standing cast iron beside Israel in this, because he wanted that. He didn't want this conflict to occur. And again, it's for electoral reasons as much as anything else. And then now he's switched effectively to trying to pressure Israel to just call this a win and take it on the chin rather than carry out some form of retaliation.
Thank you very much indeed. Colonel Richard Kemp in Jerusalem. Please stay safe. The French Prime Minister, Gabriel Attal, has announced a new penalty facing French patients this week in a bid to cut spending following a shock rise in the public deficit and debt. Under new rules, those who fail to keep doctors' appointments without giving 24 hours' notice will face a fine of €5. Doctors will retain the discretion as to whether to levy the fine or not. Dubbed the rabbit tax because poser un lapin is French for failing to show up, could the National Health Service also pull this policy out of the hat? Joining me to grab this idea by the ears is consultant surgeon J. Marion Thomas. Great to see you. Thank you for joining me again on GB News. Is there merit in this idea?
I think it's an absolutely great idea, Michael, because I can tell you that there are about 1 million DNAs did not attend appointments in general practice every month, and there are 750,000 DNAs every month in hospital practice. So this is a huge waste of resource, both in general practice and in hospitals. Now, Rishi Sunak at the 2022 Conservative Conference suggested a £10 fine per DNA, and that was a great idea, and I think somebody should consider it. You've been talking about Wes Streeting this morning. He should consider it very, very seriously. Implementing it might be a different idea.
I was going to say, do we have any idea how it would work? I mean, would you be refused an appointment unless you paid your fine?
Well, if you refuse an appointment, then the sort of liberal lefties will say, oh, you've got somebody with chronic illness and you're denying them a GP or hospital appointment, etc., and it would be unethical, for example. So it would be very difficult to... But what I think a point I would make is that even if you brought this policy in as a threat, said it's going to happen, I think that would cure it to some extent, to a great extent, just as a threat.
I can imagine a lot of people screaming at the television set at the moment because they're saying it's not that I don't turn up, it's that my appointment is cancelled, or indeed that I don't receive my letter telling me that I've got an appointment.
Yeah, all that as well. But at the end of the day, a lot of appointments, people do know that they're having an appointment, they just don't turn up. For example, hospitals now text you the whole time with your hospital appointment, and that's very, very useful. And you've got no excuse for not turning up if you've been sent one or sometimes even 2 texts.
OK, so on that, the summary of your view is there really is a problem and it's worth looking at this to see whether it might solve it.
Okay.
Now, you recently have been talking about something else, which is that with the number of appointments now with GPs that are conducted via a screen, not in person, you think that this is a major reason why early diagnosis of important diseases is being missed, and therefore that this is providing a real problem, a real threat to the public's health.
Correct, but that argument started before all this virtual consultation started. The data I published in the Daily Telegraph, that learned medical journal, refers to data that was collected before 2020. And there is absolutely no doubt about it that general practitioners are partly responsible for the poor cancer survival in the UK because they miss diagnoses and there is delay in diagnoses. For example, one of the problems is they offer no continuity of care. So there are some cancers like, say, esophageal cancer you can't swallow, or bladder cancer, you have blood in your water, for example. They're obvious symptoms, you can't miss those. But there are lots of sort of blind cancers in the tummy, stomach, pancreas, ovary, for example, when there are no specific symptoms. And the only way that a GP can diagnose those is to see the patient the second time and to see that the patient is no better and that the patient is not a complaining patient. And for the penny to drop there, perhaps there is something else going on here. That's called continuity of care. That's what GPs do not offer. And that is the reason suggested by the Medical Defence Union. That is the reason for this, for GPs being partly responsible for delay in diagnosis of cancer. All that stuff can be looked up on the internet. Just look up Medical Defence Union, delay in diagnosis of cancer. It's all there.
And where would the solution lie? Would it be in training? Would it be in more resources? Where do you think the principal problem is?
I think training is very important, Michael. For example, to become a GP, it's a 3-year training course. 2 years of those are spent in general practice and 1 year in hospital. That doesn't give you enough exposure to all the medical specialities or indeed to the complexities of medicine that are fundamental hospital practice. Meetings, medical defense, meetings in hospitals, multidisciplinary team meetings, for example, just communing with colleagues the whole time about discussion of disease. The GPs just don't get that. They go into general practice, and I call it a learning desert, quite frankly.
Gosh. J. Marion Thomas, it's always a delight to benefit from your expertise and your extraordinary experience. Still ahead, it's time to take to the stage for our weekly catch-up with Stefan Kyriazis to hear all about his latest escapades.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family. Simply go to gbnews.com/yoursay.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. So it's been a bit of a drier start for many of us this morning, all thanks to an area of high pressure situated out towards the south and the west of the UK. However, low pressure never too far away from the north, and this will bring us some blustery winds and plenty of showers that we can already see out there through this morning. These will slowly push their way eastwards as we go through the rest of this afternoon, but further south where we see that higher pressure, it has been quite a bright start, but there is a bit of hazy sunshine as we head through the afternoon. afternoon, and some further cloud bubbling up, and that could lead to 1 or 2 showers across parts of Wales and northern England. Heavier showers further north though, and with those blustery winds, temperatures around 9 or 10 degrees, but further south, not quite as warm as Saturday. Through the rest of this evening, those showers continue to push in from the west, always heaviest across northern and western parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, and they slowly spread their way south and eastwards as we go through the early hours of Monday morning. Perhaps some dry weather for a time across the far southeast, but it will be turning wet everywhere by the start of Monday. A chilly night again, temperatures in the south around 7 or 8 degrees, but even chillier still across the north in the low single figures, so a very chilly start to the day on Monday. Those heaviest bands of showers push their way towards the south and the east through Monday morning, leaving some sunny spells as we head into the afternoon, but there will still be plenty of showers around. These could even turn to snow across the Pennines and the high ground of Scotland. With a brisk northwesterly breeze, it will be feeling chilly as well, with highs in the south around 13 degrees.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. Another busy week for theatregoers, and Stefan Kyriazis, as always, is one of those, and he's been to see Player Kings, an adaptation of Shakespeare's 2 parts of Henry IV, in which Sir Ian McKellen, aged 84, plays Falstaff. Stefan, lovely to see you. How was it?
Well, it gives us all hope that we'll still be staggering around. It's an interesting thing. It's a condensation of the 2 plays, but the plays are a kind of complete journey for Falstaff and for Hal, and then Henry V into Henry V. It's a modern setting, and I think we've got a clip of how it's all been set up and a little bit of a look behind the scenes and people chatting on opening night.
You turned to me in the interval and you were like, Shakespeare's really funny, isn't he? And it is funny, and it's beautiful.
It's an incredible production. It's got fantastic actors. Ian McKellen, I only hope that when I am his age, I am able to have that amount of energy and fire and passion. He is an icon.
I was gripped the entire time. I mean, it makes Shakespeare so much more accessible.
Very touching, very moving, and of course, very funny.
If you don't come and see this man, and indeed all the cast, which are phenomenal, you will regret it. It's a beautiful evening at Shakespeare, it really is.
Falstaff is often portrayed as being very, very stout, but he has to be very vigorous as well.
Yes.
And Ian McKellen is able to do that.
He's well padded, so he's got all that. And it opens very much, he's the sort of garrulous, slightly disreputable charmer, if just about. And you can see there, very pared down staging, brick walls. Those walls move in and out. There are just curtains that are opened and closed. I didn't love it at first, but it kind of starts creating an atmosphere, especially when the curtains reveal new scenes behind them. So it's tastefully, beautifully done, not extraordinarily done. And Falstaff is there covered in beer and food. We open a little bit like the recent Henry V with Kit Harington, the Donmar. We pretty much open with a rave, underground rave party, thumping drum and bass music, everyone staggering around, and a flash of a very pert bottom that's staggering around the stage that turns around into Tommy Jimmo, who is playing the young Prince Hal, so possibly a first for theatre. And yes, it's a very active role. McKellen is 84, but he's still got the presence. He has the voice. He manages to do a very kind of phlegmy, dissolute, sort of gargled voice, a lot of it. And he absolutely carries it. And it's thrilling in that way. I think for me, they play very much on, he's so charismatic, so charming. We love Ian McKellen. So it's very difficult, and it doesn't really delve into, there is a darker side to Falstaff. He's a chancer, he's an opportunist, but also he's literally, you know, robbing dead bodies, conscripting soldiers for money and throwing them away because he doesn't care.
Would certainly have been called out by the Me Too movement.
He would have been called out by lots of people, but then equally, you can see it on the other side of, he's just who he is, and then against the kings and the politicians who are all very proper on the surface, but they're all doing dastardly things and betraying people and throwing them away. So I would have liked a bit more darkness, and I'm not sure it brings out all the father-son patterns all the way through. He's a father figure. His own father would actually rather that Hotspur, the enemy prince, was his. I just want to say that Samuel Edward Cook as Hotspur and then Pistol in the second part is electrifying and an absolute highlight for me.
And you should also say where we can see it.
This is on at the Noel Coward until June the 22nd, and the good news for this is another one of these shows that's touring very alliteratively. We're going to Bristol, Birmingham, Norwich, Newcastle. It's long, it's over 3.5 hours, so sort of drink up before you go in.
From Shakespeare to Shakespeare. Eddie Izzard.
Yes, we've got
one-woman show.
This has been currently running in New York, just finished there, heading to Chicago, and then it's coming across to the Riverside Studios. And again, we've got a little clip from the American run here.
Thou shalt not go. Something is rotten in the state of Denmark. Though this be madness, yet there is method in it. From this time forth, my thoughts be bloody or be nothing worth.
Well, we've seen a lot of Hamlets. What did you get out of this one?
Well, this one is coming to the Riverside in June. I've seen him do his Great Expectations, Dickens, and I was thoroughly entertained and charmed by it. But Dickens is almost telling a story, so it can almost be done by one person as if it was being read aloud, which it would have been done back in the day. Hamlet is a whole other prospect. I always love the fact, as critics, and you see all the reviews and stuff splashed up, so I'm always checking who's there, and I have read a lot of the reviews. None of the heavy-hitting American reviewers are being flashed up a lot. There's a lot of feeling that he is, again, charismatic and charming, extremely charismatic and charming, but there is too much in this play. It's too dense. There are too many characters. And as we know, I have a real problem with the whole, well, I thought that this was happening, Michael. Well, I disagree with you, Stefan.
There's so much of it around at the moment.
There's an awful lot.
Do you mind if we move on to Sheridan Smith's opening night, was it called?
Yes.
You gave it a savage review, and its closing night is coming up.
Yes, absolutely. And
does this have implications beyond the show itself?
It does, and there's been a lot rolling around, and there's been some critics and arts people in the press going, thoroughly defending the show. It's a tragedy that it's closing. There's a little comment that I wanted to read from the producers where they talk about the fact that it was always a risk, which is fair enough, but they sort of, it's a slightly underhanded, what is surefire and safe has its place against everything else, and they are sort of patting themselves on the back for always being bold and adventurous.
Yes.
So I will...
You have some sympathy with that view.
I will defend the bold and adventurous 100%. But there is also a very long-standing process in theatre for over 100 years of out-of-town tryouts, workshops, smaller venues, you know, shows like Operation Mincemeat or whatever it might be, Standing at the Sky's Edge, or even things that go on often at the National, which is a smaller space, and it's a safe space with a built-in audience. Give shows time to grow, like Warhorse. I feel this show should close because it's money and it's people's money. And I'm also very worried that people will come and go, oh, God, I tried theatre. What was that? I'm not going to do it again. And that, I think, is a massive concern, let alone investors that will get a little bit jumpy.
I think we just have time. You might say those people got their comeuppance. But you have a show called Comeuppance.
Yeah, this is on at the Almeida, and this is an American playwright, and he actually is finding more of a home in London, and he is a huge fan of London and the diversity in London, the different theatres. It's about, you can see here, it's about a bunch of friends reuniting for the 20th anniversary of their prom, and the idea is the mistakes of the past will need their consequences. They will have their comeuppance. And he has, this guy, the playwright is Brandon Jacob Jennings. He has a beautiful, very flowing way with dialogue. It feels real, like organic, how you would talk to your friends. And also that whole, there's banter, but often underneath, there's digs and passive aggression and little bits of resentment. And I guess the gimmick of this show is every now and then one of the stage will black out, one of the characters will be highlighted, and they will become Death. And then Death will speak through them, because Death is watching all of this and popping in and out of people's characters. I can't review because those reviews are still embargoed, but that's a really interesting way of looking at it and then looking at life over time and the passage. So for me, this is experimental slightly and has a place, and it's a smaller, artier theatre. So I'm thoroughly behind that.
Thank you very much indeed. Stefan Kyriazis, you are watching Michael Portillo on GB News, Britain's news channel. That concludes the first hour of this programme, but please don't go away. After the break, we'll be discussing what price people are willing to pay for dearly held political objectives. Plus, we're going to talk about atonal music with the composer Keith Burstein. And I'll be tasting some delicious wines with an enthusiast as we get to the bottom of the post-Brexit taxes on wine.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. So it's been a bit of a drier start for many of us this morning, all thanks to an area of high pressure situated out towards the south and the west of the UK. However, low pressure never too far away from the north, and this will bring us some blustery winds and plenty of showers that we can already see out there through this morning. These will slowly push their way eastwards as we go through the rest of this afternoon, but further south where we see that higher pressure, it has been quite a bright start, but there is a bit of hazy sunshine as we head through the afternoon, and some further cloud bubbling up, and that could lead to 1 or 2 showers across parts of Wales and northern England. Heavier showers further north though, and with those blustery winds, temperatures around 9 or 10 degrees, but further south, not quite as warm as Saturday. Through the rest of this evening, those showers continue to push in from the west, always heaviest across northern and western parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, and they slowly spread their way south and eastwards as we go through the early hours of Monday morning. Perhaps some dry weather for a time across the far southeast, but it will be turning wet everywhere by the start of Monday. A chilly night again, temperatures in the south around 7 or 8 degrees, but even chillier still across the north in the low single figures, so a very chilly start to the day on Monday. Those heaviest bands of showers push their way towards the south and the east through Monday morning, leaving some sunny spells as we head into the afternoon, but there will still be plenty of showers around. These could even turn to snow across the Pennines and the high ground of Scotland. With a brisk northwesterly breeze, it will be feeling chilly as well, with highs in the south around 13 degrees.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Variety Cruises have been sailing since 1942, and thanks to them, you could set sail in 2025. You have the chance to win a 7-night small boat cruise for 2 worth £10,000. With your flights, meals, drinks and excursions included, you can choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. You'll also win an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash that you can use to make this summer spectacular. We'll also treat you to these luxury travel gifts. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or